Was Ronald Reagan really the first actor president? Was he the first president who we had spent years learning to like on the big screen before they were elected to preside over the small one? Or had that brilliant behaviorist scheme already been tested on a subliminal level with the man known as the King of Hollywood? What was it about Eisenhower that inspired such enormous landslides? An interesting theory of 50s nostalgia is suggested by a character in Ross Thomas's novel Missionary Stew. I think it was Gable, mostly. Clark Gable? Right, Hare said. If you closed your eyes when Eisenhower talked, he sounded exactly like Clark Gable. That must have been really reassuring to most people. Indeed. And how fortuitous for Ike. Unless that effect was by design? Either way, the same thing is noted in essays on Eisenhower at Fort Lewis, and his D-Day radio address, and a PBS biopic, and by Impressionist Will Jordan, and other commenters.
In better company.
In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms
And
on
don't
other
think
fronts,
they are dishing it out,
you will
too.
bring about the destruction of
Any
the German
kid
war
who
machine,
can handle himself,
the elimination of
and he
Nazi
doesn't have to
tyranny
be an
over the
all-American
oppressed
to get
peoples
into
of
good
Europe.
shape.
But as you can see, the resemblance doesn't require closed eyes. Saturday Review critic Hollis Alpert wrote about 1958's Teacher's Pet that Mr. Gable looks and sounds a little too much like President Eisenhower. Too much for comfort, or too much to be a coincidence? Hallucinatory or not, this resemblance could only amplify what official history tells us, that Ike was the first presidential candidate to be mass-marketed in the pop culture celebrity style, complete with cartoon TV ads. Even before he agreed to run, a hit Broadway song, They Like Ike, was drilling his campaign slogan into the public head, building up to a big midnight rally at Madison Square Garden which featured many celebrities, including Clark Gable. Apparently, it was very important that Ike be endorsed by the King of Hollywood himself, as he had to violate his contract with MGM in order to participate in the televised event. He reportedly spoke with the absent general over the phone, urging him to run, but Eisenhower's biographies make no mention of him participating in the rally. Instead, it was a film of the event flown to Europe for him to watch, which affected him profoundly and finally convinced him to run. Warren Harris's 2002 biography claims that Gable, quote, revered Eisenhower and had met him several times during his Air Force service, end quote, but there's nothing about these alleged meetings in that section or anywhere else. According to local historians, they were both in Bangor Bay, County Down, Ireland on May 19th, 1944, but no hint of a meeting. Gable and Eisenhower are often described as close friends or pals when recounting a chummy get-wellogram Gable is said to have received from Ike after his 1960 heart attack. But David Brett's 2007 biography stresses that, quote, Clark and the president had not been on first-name terms. There was no telegram, end quote. Instead, there was a very different, half-formal letter. For some reason, the substance of this letter was rewritten for popular memory with a heavy spin of familiarity and presented as fact rather than rumor. So there are false claims of friendship, uncertain accounts of interactions, and rumors of meetings with no source. But wait, you say, what about this? Yes, there is this image of a meeting. The story of this image is that it's an image without a story, apart from one unsourced, unfootnoted paragraph in Christopher Spicer's 2002 bio, a strange little story which also claims that they met during the war, with no further detail. There's no reference to this White House meeting in any other biography of either man. The given date, April 2nd, 1958, is an otherwise prominent one in Eisenhower's story. That was the day he gave a big speech to Congress proposing a civilian space agency. The NASA we know and trust was officially born a few months later, but it was conceived the day that these two allegedly met. Not only is this highly intriguing, it makes it all the more odd that meeting with the president on such a historic day would not be worth mentioning anywhere else. Why are there so many contradictory and unsourced claims about a personal relationship between these two? Can you think of a reason for that very specific pattern of misdirection? Eisenhower was a major American face of the war, and so was Gable. not just any celebrity soldier, the king of Hollywood was making recruitment films. He was not just any patriotic enlistee, but a grieving widower whose wife was the first lady casualty of the war. She died in a plane crash while on tour selling war bonds, leaving him a really ripping motivational backstory for his military service. But before the public saw Gable narrating war documentaries that he had shot himself while risking his life in the thick of battle, they saw him play a newsreel reporter who fakes war footage in Too Hot to Handle. One of his classmates from officer training remembers how he won them over. Quote, "We began to realize he was the real McCoy. But still, you'd say to yourself, only an actor can act the way he does. The day he arrived, he had more military bearing than most of the men had when they left, partly because of his natural posture, and partly because he was an actor, I'm sure." Gable's own accounts of his early life are considered unreliable by his biographers, who describe contradictory records of his name at birth, contradictory records of his mother's cause of death, contradictory stories about his years after dropping out of high school, including rumors he worked for the mob in Akron, contradictory records of his age when he was first married. Gable once told an interviewer that the studios don't allow actors to reveal their year of birth. Their true age was officially a mystery. It's perhaps relevant that Gable's father, quote, "belonged to the Freemasons and swore by its credos," according to Harris. Clark became a Mason at age 33, we think. When he died, just a few days after Ike's successor was elected, he insisted on a closed casket. On May 6th of 1952, Gable announced he'd be away in Europe for a year and a half, just as Eisenhower was returning from Europe to launch his presidential campaign on June 4th. Eisenhower's support had been built in his absence. After winning the nomination, he let his campaign managers choose his running mate and his entire cabinet for him. Was that because he was an indecisive Libra? Or because he was only the frontman, figurehead face of someone else's political experiment? Gable is said to have personally desegregated the set of Gone with the Wind by threatening to quit. President Eisenhower immediately desegregated everything under his direct authority, the military, Washington, D.C., federally funded schools, before the Supreme Court started that process on a state level in 1954. They both played bridge and golf, both hit their only hole-in-one on the 13th hole. They both enjoyed shooting skeet and were very good baseball hitters as young men. They both had big, stick-out ears. That's important. It should go without saying that the shape of the ear is one of the easiest things to alter, since it doesn't impede speech or facial expression. There are differences here, but it's a difference of degree, not difference in kind. They have the same kind of ears, the big stick-out kind. Lots of people noticed the voice. One critic noticed the face, but there's another famous writer who mentions these two together. David frickin' Bowie. In Planet of Dreams from the Long Live Tibet benefit album, he sings, "You see I got Gable's eyes, and Eisenhower blames the poor." Eisenhower was president when the Dalai Lama escaped Tibet. That could explain mentioning him, maybe. But why mention Gable in the same breath? Is this why? We're backing up a major plan. We're treading on thin ice. The song fades out repeating, "We're living in a planet of dreams." Couldn't agree more.